Hey folks, welcome back to Game Geeks. I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Today's episode, we are going to be reviewing the Fate Freeport Companion by Ronin Publishing. Now, Freeport is a setting that has been around for quite a while and has been multi-statted into a variety of systems for you to play with. The basic idea of it is a pirate-influenced fantasy setting which has your dwarves, your elves, your halflings, etc., but it is a city, Freeport, which is a lawless hive of scum and villainy, where your players can interact and do naughty things and try to help people, and it has some real dark aspects of it too. There's a real mythos component, there's a real like ancient secrets and ancient magic that's steeped into the area. It's an interesting setting, particularly if you're looking for pirate-themed fantasy. Now, what makes this different from some of the other stat systems is that this has been specifically built for Fate Core, which we reviewed previously, which had an explosively wonderful Kickstarter, and which is really one of the real leading games in the industry right now. There was an interesting interesting stat I saw of the top 5 games of 2013, and Fate was much higher on that list than I thought it would be. Came in at like 3rd, I think, with the first being Pathfinder, the second being the Star Wars game from Fantasy Flight, 3rd being Fate, 4th being Dungeons & Dragons, and 5th being Iron Kingdoms. Now, what do you have with the Fate Freeport Companion? What comes in this book? Interestingly enough, it is one of the more curious takes on Fate I've ever seen, because you still have your standard aspects, but it does away with the skill pyramid and the skill system. Now all the skills are condensed down into strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And instead of a pyramid, you now have rankings according to the power level of the game that you're playing. For instance, if you are playing in a standard power level game, your skill distribution is you have a +3, 2 +2s, 2 +1s, and a 0. Again, with just those standard 6 skills. Whereas the epic level game has a 5, 2 4s, a 3, a 1, and a 0. What this does is it really makes you think about what stat governs your skill. And so a lot of it comes from the standard Dungeons & Dragons, where strength governs how hard you hit and how well you hit with a melee weapon, dexterity for your ranged weapons, etc. Your stunts now can change that a little bit, and some of the stunts feel like feats from other D20 versions. Like there's a stunt where you can use your dexterity as your attack instead of strength if you're using a light weapon. I think we've seen that before. I think it's called weapon finesse. Now, along those lines though, weapon damage has been greatly simplified, with your smaller, more standard weapons doing 0, your martial weapons doing +1 damage, which is the damage you add to the shifts of damage you do over what their defense is. And finally, the heavy weapons, your two-handed swords, your giant mauls, your wheelbarrows, if that's your sort of game, do 2 points of damage over your overflow of shift damage you have from your attack. Armor, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily grant you specific damage reduction. What it does is it grants you 1, 2, or 3 free invokes that you get to play with per session if you have light, medium, or no armor. So essentially it's a free aspect that you get a number of free invocations on per adventure, but each one can also be used against you. Now remember, Freeport is essentially a water-based, if not a water-based campaign, then water's a pretty darn important piece of it. Armor's going to make you sink. Firearms are also available as weapons because it's a pirate-feeling game. And magic, one of the more interesting things they've done with magic is they've condensed it down into schools that you have access to, and depending on the number of schools you have anywhere between 2 to 3 spells. So say if you're a war wizard, you then have access to the evocation and abjuration schools, and you can pick 2 spells from either of those schools, so either both of one or 1 and 1. Whereas if you are, say, a manipulator, which is more, you change the world around you with magic, you have access to the transmutation school, but you get 3 spells from it. So you can see how they've balanced breadth with what you can do. Now, magic in this comes at a cost, and that cost can come in any one of several ways. It can either be you accept a shift of mental stress, which sort of is it's hard on your mind to cast magic, or it costs you a fate point, or it costs you a boost, which means you have to succeed with style on your spellcasting roll, or you spend a round casting it and the next round it goes into effect. The standard seems to be it costs you a fate point, which is a little steep to me, but I think I still need to work on the give and take of fate points. I'm pretty good at thinking of how to use them and how to use them appropriately without being too stingy, but trying to buy them back with things I'm doing to make the story more interesting, I'm still a little weak on. Then it gives you the sort of the characters of Freeport, which gives you a lot of NPCs that you can play with and interesting applications of some stunts. And finally, the critters of Freeport as part of that as well, which are some of your standard monsters. One of my personal favorites in here is the giant clam, which has the aspects really big clam, snap, and still just a clam. I love funny aspects like that. Then it gives you some ideas of the setting. There are some interesting sanity and corruption rules because, like I said, there's some really dark and nasty stuff running around in the baseline of Freeport. New approaches with wealth and equipment. And finally, at the back of the book, there is an adventure for you to put your players through called Fury in Freeport, which sort of gives you an idea about how to do adventure design for Freeport and the environs using the Fate system. This has been one of my favorite Fate books I've read in a while, just because it sort of takes what you know, or what you think you know about Fate, and disassembles it to show you what a toolkit that the Fate system really is. I've had some issues with trying to play it before, and my good friend Jordan, hey Joy, is now running the Camelot Trigger game that I was so excited about several reviews ago, and it's going beautifully, and it's really showing me, at least from the player side, how Fate can work well with using the skills, gaining boosts, temporary aspects, tagging aspects, letting other people use the aspects that you've created if it makes better tactical and role-playing sense for them to be able to do it. For example, we were just in a fight and I spent 3 rounds psyching out the big bad before the blades actually got drawn, and there were several aspects that I was able to produce from that I handed off to other players to use in the combat while I was doing something else. So it kind of shows how the talkie characters can still be very useful in a combat setting. It also shows how the narrative focus of Fate gives you a lot of different options that the more tactical approach usually has. Fate Freeport Companion from Green Ronin Publishing. You know, folks, if you like Fate and you want to see how you can use Fate in a fantasy setting, this is one of the best things that you can do, especially with the Legends of Angler and Starblazer Adventure licenses expiring in the extremely near future from the filming of this video from Cubicle 7. This might become one of the solely focused fantasy Fate applications, try saying that when you're drunk, that you're going to see for at least the foreseeable future. For Game Geeks, I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Good day and good gaming.